After the general thrust of his argumentation, White offers a final argument that he calls the fatal flaw in the ecclesiastical text movement. So notice it's actually a fatal flaw in a movement, not in the TR itself. The argument is based on three major premises: a hypothetical situation, a critique of the methodology used to form what is now known as the Textus Receptus, and another critique that labels the defense of the TR as circular. Not exactly right in any one of them, unfortunately. And given how many misrepresentations I'm seeing, either I'm just horrible at explaining this, or this tradition really causes people to misinterpret things. The fact of the matter is, James Snap understands what I'm saying. He may disagree with the particulars of how we respond, but we're both saying the exact same thing in what we're seeing when we identify traditionalism versus any kind of meaningful textual critical analysis of anything. So, if James Snap can hear what I'm saying, I don't know why these guys can't. The arguments are as follows. One, if all the versions of the New Testament were wiped out, the methods employed by modern critical text criticism would be able to reconstruct the text we have today. Let me try this again. When we talk about versions, if we're talking about the printed text, the Nestle-Aland, UBS, ECM, Tregelles, Tischendorf, so on, Scribner, so on and so forth. If all the printed copies that have been produced since the first one in 1560, if we simply took the relevant manuscript tradition and said, let's start from scratch and produce a Greek New Testament, there are standards. There are each one has utilized particular. Now those standards can change over time. There has been a move away from privileging Sinaiticus and Vaticanus over everybody else. That was very plainly present in Tischendorf, very plainly present in Westcott and Hort. That has changed. The current advent of CBGM, coherence-based genealogical methodology, is introducing a relatively small number of changes. But I think once you're done with the whole New Testament, it'll probably be at least 600-700, of which maybe 75, 80, maybe up to 100 will actually be very translationally relevant. CBGM is changing the whole ground of the conversation. I can't even recommend to you a New Testament textual introduction right now. I can't. Everything's changed so much. And will be changing. Between now and 2030. That's when the ECM should be completed. Is over the next 11 years. Once that's all out, then it would be possible to say, okay, here's the current state of things. But it's changing, and this is what the other side doesn't like. It shouldn't change. Why shouldn't it change? Because we don't want change. We want to have black and white. Well, that's nice, but the problem is that means you don't view things historically. You obviously don't read much in the early church fathers, or in the medieval period, or anybody else for that matter. Do you really think that someone should have said in 1540, that's enough, we've got the 5 editions of Erasmus, that's it, no more? Theodore Beza, stop that. You stop looking at that stuff. Again, it depends on where you want to plop yourself down in history as to what quote unquote change after that point. Anyway, the point is that textual traditionalism, ecclesiastical textism, whatever you want to call it, does not have a critical methodology that applies to manuscripts that would ever produce this text. The arguments for each of those texts that I mentioned to you are going to be different. That's all there is to it. And if you have to use multiple standards, that inconsistency is a sign of a failed argument. Somebody started saying that back in 2006 at Biola. Number 2, the methods used to produce the traditional text of the New Testament are inconsistent and cannot be applied unilaterally. Right. Erasmus dragged stuff in from the Vulgate. Erasmus had very limited manuscript evidence. Even the manuscript evidence he had only represents one portion of the Byzantine textual tradition. And I'm not even talking about Revelation here. Once you get into Revelation, it becomes nuts. That's different than Stephanus, who introduced a few other manuscripts. And then Beza, who's utilizing foreign language versions, and Syriac, which is a secondary translation. It is not the primary language of the New Testament. And who was deeply influenced by the Latin Vulgate as well, by the Latin text. So, the number 2 argument is that there is no single textual critical theory that will give rise to the TR, that will reproduce it as it exists today. Number 3, the case of the traditional text begins with the TR, and facts are used to support the text of the TR, therefore it is circular. Exactly. If you begin with that, and then whatever you need to do with the facts to substantiate this reading, you can do one thing there, and then you do it completely different set of arguments, different way of argumentation, different weighting of evidence for this one, different over here, different over there. Yeah, it's a patchwork quilt that is inconsistent with itself, and hence indefensible to any person who knows what it is, knows it well enough to know what the background is. Yep, that's right. There you go. It's not just circular, it's incoherent. It's not even, I really wasn't emphasizing the circularity, but the incoherence of even trying to say you're doing textual critical argumentation in the first place. Just admit, this is it. Just join Stephen Anderson. King James is our standard. That's where we start. That's the way it is. There you go. Okay. The first part of Dr. White's argument is based on a hypothetical situation which makes it inductive and therefore a mere probability, even if it truly happened. Irrelevant. That's not the argument. The argument is the lack of a consistent methodology to produce a Greek New Testament. I don't know why you guys got focused on, and Robert Truelove did the same thing, got focused on, well, that's just a hypothetical. The point is that there is a consistent methodology. You can argue whether the editorial committees were consistent in the application of their own standards, but they had standards. Metzger published his commentary. ECM, not so much the general epistles, but there is a commentary on Acts in one of the volumes on Acts. They're trying to be consistent, and at least CBGM is a lot easier to be consistent on because you've got numbers. You know, here's the numbers. Here's where this reading is consistent and that reading is consistent. You can disagree with it, but at least it's there. The point is not the hypothetical. The point is that one side is actually doing textual criticism and the other side is not. And the other side uses inconsistent, incoherent, incompatible arguments at this point, this point, this point, this point to drive the text. That's the point. The conclusion hinges on him being able to control all variables in his hypothetical world in which this fatal flaw argument exists. No, it does not. It depends on specific data being available on his choosing. Well, if by that you mean that, again, you have to go into history here. Erasmus had this amount of information. Stephanus had this amount. Beza had this amount. And that's pretty much it. We now have this amount that goes much earlier and is much more thoroughly collated and accurately collated. They did not have high resolution photography back then. They did not have the ability. The manuscripts were not yet identified and cataloged and all that kind of stuff. We've got an advantage. You can ignore that history if you want. I can't stop you. But specific data being available based on his choosing. Well, I'm simply saying, let's just look at the manuscript tradition as it exists today. What we have access to today. If we produced a new ECM based on the manuscript tradition as it exists today, it's going to look very, very, very much like what we have. But you ain't going to produce this. And you have to produce this right down to the last words. Once you start saying, well, okay, we can, there's some places that we can make changes here, there. Look out. The other guys are coming after you now. They're going to be on you like a duck on a June bug. Yet his hypothetical that creates an ideal scenario for his already presupposed position can be answered with another, less absurd hypothetical. I don't even know what this is about. Y'all didn't understand what I'm saying, and I don't know why. I don't get it. Why don't you understand what I'm saying? What happens to modern textual criticism if Sinaiticus and Vaticanus were never published? Now, what's interesting is I've had a few little conversations with these guys, and they've offered me Mexican food. I'm going to take them up on that. It's just a matter of when to, I'll take, it's worth chips and salsa, man. Real good chicken chimney. Yeah. Just got to find the place over there. But as soon as I hear someone talking like this, I know they're reading stuff from the 1880s. Dean Bergon, they mentioned to me, well, you're just using Schleiermacher's arguments. I'm going, what? Well, German higher criticism. What do you mean? And they thought modern lower textual criticism is just simply Schleiermacher. And I'm like, you haven't read Schleiermacher, have you? No. If you can't tell the difference between form criticism, redaction criticism, source criticism, which is by in the main theoretical in form, and textual criticism, where you actually have to have stuff like that and collate things and have data and manuscripts and stuff like that, then you don't understand what the field's about. And you've been reading some bad stuff. And there's bad stuff out there. And a lot of it's very dated. Very, very dated. That's why I've said more than once. And people don't get this idea that you're overblowing the papyri, blah, blah. You cannot make a meaningful comment about the state of the New Testament manuscript tradition, especially as it relates to the conveying of the most primitive readings of the New Testament, without talking about the papyri. You can't. And I've given an illustration. There's lots of books written between 1900 and 1940 that speculated about the nature of space, what was beyond this planet, what was out there. They're fascinating, but they're also meaningless outside of having historical use, in light of the fact we've gone there now. We've been to space. We know a whole lot more about it than we did in 1940. So those books back then are interesting, but they're no longer relevant. And books specifically talking about the nature of the earliest readings of the New Testament, written post-papyri, that do not take into consideration the papyri themselves, are irrelevant. Historically interesting, but not relevant to the current state of knowledge of the manuscript tradition. I just cannot imagine anyone arguing that, against that. I just can't. So, what happens to modern textual criticism if Sinaiticus and Vaticanus were never published? Has nothing to do with what I was saying. The issue is the application of consistent textual critical analysis to Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, not if they were never published. Guys, you just don't understand what I'm talking about. I'm sorry. I've tried. You've got to ask yourselves the question, why don't we get this? Because other people do. And I think it may have something to do with fundamental misunderstandings of some of the basic aspects of this. Could you produce any semblance of the modern critical text as it appears today in the NA 28? I guess that's without Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Or what happens if a first century manuscript is found without Romans 9 in it? Will the modern critical text remove it? His fatal flaw argument crumbles when faced with other less extreme hypothetical arguments. None of those arguments were even relevant. On a logical basis, you just failed Logic 101. Sorry, guys. Don't mean to be mean to you, but you just, if you're going to go to print, you might want to know what you're going to print about. And you might say, well, who do you think? Look, why do you think I went to Munster last month? I mean, just to take pictures of the 3 cages? That was fun. But that's not why I went to Munster. I went to the INTF. I sat down with the leading expert in CBGM in the world right now and had in-depth conversation with him about my dissertation and what I'm working on and the directions I'm going and about general textual critical issues. You don't put together your dissertation and continue the direction you're going without checking some of this stuff out. So a lot of this stuff is just basic stuff. It really is. But I will have to ask a question of you all that Bart Ehrman asked of me. Have you ever collated a manuscript? Do you know what collations are? Have you done any of this work? It is painstaking. It is forever. I mean, right now, one of the things I'm trying to invest time in between social justice warriors and everything else, is putting together the numbers for such things as, given P45, P45 has a number of singular readings. Any of you ever read Royce's book on singular readings? It is seriously that big. It's massive. You know that because had you chopped the spine off of one once? Yes, so we could scan it. P45 has a lot of singular readings. Part of my issue in analyzing, in making a critical analysis of CBGM in the earliest periods is how can it deal with the historical reality of a witness such as P45? Which has a very unique textual character to it. One of the things I've got to do, I've got to find all the singular readings in the ECM in comparison to P74 and to a number of other witnesses that I'm using in the first 7 centuries in the ECM analysis of the materials currently available in Acts. When you got to do that work, it sort of helps to clarify things a little bit. And it just seems to me, I'm sorry, that there's a lot of stuff being said by folks who have never done anything along those lines at all. And you just think about it. Try to think about it and realize, yeah, maybe, yeah, okay. Let me just wrap up with this. Or what happens if a first century manuscript is found without Romans 9 in it? Well, first of all, we don't have any first century manuscripts. Secondly, it is interesting that the Text and Canon Conference, those 2 issues are extremely important. Text and canon. And what these guys are doing is they are recognizing, and here's where hopefully I'll be able to explain this because this is extremely important. I've noticed that a lot of them like to take shots at me and Michael Kruger. Dr. Kruger, of course, has written extensively on the canon, but he's no ecclesiastical text advocate by any stretch of the imagination. And so these guys who are Reformed, go after that. Now, I just minimized, unfortunately. Let me see if I can find it. What I had mentioned before, and that is, see, show all windows. That didn't do me any good. Is that it? Nope, that's not it. Anyway, I lost the one that says that I'm not a presuppositionalist. And this is bumming me out that I can't. There it is. Yes, okay, there it is. Good, all right. Josh Summers said, well, we can gather at least two things from this thread. James White is not a presuppositionalist, and Robert Truelove is simply being consistent with Van Til's revelatory epistemology, even though Van Til would not have agreed with him on textual issues. I would love to see this discussion really get to the heart of the matter, which begins prior to questions about source or text criticism. Both men represent two different views on metaphysics. Consciously or not, I cannot tell, as it relates to epistemology. The view of my dear brother Robert's thinking properly originates in a fundamental conflation of the order of being and the order of knowing. Dr. White is, at least in practice, allowing for a distinction between the two in this discussion. An innate and acquired natural understanding of God and his laws of nature, laws of logic, are required for textual criticism. This means they are required before making the scriptures intelligible. No, 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 and triple, quadruple no. Deep breath. I hate seeing the Reformed theology I love twisted like this. I really do. I really do. Because I believe firmly in the priority of God's revelation. But you guys are confusing God's revelation with a 16th century production of a Roman Catholic priest, for crying out loud. Wake up. Ugh. Can't you see that? Can't you see how unworkable this is? You and your big highfalutin theology. I know that big highfalutin theology. I love it. You're abusing it, for crying out loud. Urgh. Sorry. This means that this natural understanding comes prior to the presupposition of the Christian God revealed only in the scriptures. I don't believe that there is any human knowledge that can be properly grounded outside the Christian God. Let me say that again. I don't. And I believe that the Christian God is the one who's created the world to where there has to be a consistency in your argumentation, in science or textual criticism. And the Christian God is the reason I reject your circularity. The Christian God is why I say inconsistency is a sign of a failed argument. And that's why your argument fails. How's that? Unfortunately, White is not consistent with this when it comes to arguments for God and his support of what we might call tag-onlyism, because in the final analysis, he's not a tag-onlyist, as this discussion has proven. So tag, by the way, is the transcendental argument for the existence of God. And so I've never understood how the transcendental argument is relevant to the analysis of Revelation 16:5. Okay? If you want to say that it is in some overarching way, fine, but good luck making that work. You cannot be a presuppositionalist if you presuppose principles prior to presupposing the Christian expression, God, which I do not. You are in error, sir. Josh Sommer, S-O-M-M-E-R. You are in error, sir. So, all this, when it says, what if you found a first century manuscript, which we'd love to find. I'd love to find a first century manuscript. What if it's found without Romans 9 in it? Okay, it doesn't contain Romans 9. It's never happened. If it happens, then we'd have to ask the question, is there continuous text? Is there something... Does Romans 8 end here and Romans 10 start there? Or is there a defective manuscript? What is it? There's all sorts of questions that would immediately have to be asked. But the fact is, there is no evidence whatsoever that Romans 9 is in any sense a textual variant. So are you asking the question about canon now, as in the content of Romans as a whole? Or are you talking about manuscripts where there's an actual variant that's relevant? There are only two major variants, block of text-wise, in the New Testament. Longer ending of Mark, medium ending of Mark, short ending of Mark, pericope adultery. That's it. There isn't anything else. You've got single verses. You do not have any blocks. So, if that were to happen, the vast majority of the text, a manuscript tradition, would stand against whatever that manuscript said. It would be fascinating. We need to look at what context was. There's all sorts of things that have to bring up. But this raises the issue of the relationship of canon. And the canon is a theological construct. The text exists in history. And if you do not see what the relationship between the two are is, you're going to create this kind of textual traditionalism. And it is grossly inconsistent for Reformed men to end up staying the same place where Pope Sixtus stood when he defined the Latin Vulgate as the text of the church. If you can get there, you missed the boat someplace, guys. You missed the boat someplace, guys. You really did. Hiya, hiya, hiya. There you go.